This is The Samhain Stone, written by Coops.
They say every village in England hides a secret. Some are buried in old churchyards, some whisper behind pub doors after dark, and some are carved in stone. In the mist-soaked village of Hazelgrove, a visiting archaeologist believes he's found history, a relic from a forgotten age. But as Halloween night draws near, and the veil between worlds begins to thin, he'll learn that some stones remember far more than time. They remember what came before. Chapter 1. The veil Thin's rain in North Yorkshire didn't so much fall as hang in the air, a wet, penetrating mist that greyed Hazelgrove stone and settled straight into the bones. Dr. Aris Thorne, newly arrived from Arizona's sun-baked campuses, took the chill as a personal slight. He hauled the collar of his waxed jacket higher. Its unfamiliar stiffness felt like a poor bargain against an October damp that knew every seam. The village looked torn from a postcard. Honey-coloured cottages with slate-dark roofs gathered round a triangular green. A sign for the hare and moon creaked on rusty iron brackets. Wood smoke and wet earth stitched themselves into the permanent scent of the place. Picturesque, yes, but to Aris it felt withholding. The old walls seemed to drink sound and curiosity in equal measure. His office at the University of York was all clean lines and bright lights, but he knew the real work waited out here, in places that kept their secrets close. A throwaway line in a local history journal had snagged him. The Samhain Stone, a lone standing stone on a farmer's land at the village edge. The grainy photo showed carvings, concentric circles, tight spirals, jagged forks like lightning, unlike any documented Celtic pattern in the region. Older, stranger. First stop, the hare and moon. Inside, warmth pooled low beneath blackened beams. Ale and roasting meat thickened the air. A fire cracked in a vast stone hearth. Conversation, easy a moment before, stuttered and thinned as he stepped in. A dozen weathered faces followed him to the bar. "Pint of your best, please," Aris said, aiming for disarming. The publican, broad, florid, apron clean, nodded and pulled. "Not from round here," he observed, tone level. "No. States. I'm an archaeologist up at the university. I'm here about the standing stone. The one they call the Samhain Stone." A glass clinked too loud in the hush, the publican's friendliness cooled by degrees. He set the pint down with a firm thud. "Aye, the old stone, best left alone, that one." "Why do you say that?" Aris asked, interest brightening. "Local folklore." Folklore. A woman's voice, clear-edged, cut across the haze. She stepped out from a shadowed booth with an empty glass. Late 40s, perhaps. Green eyes sharp with intelligence. Dark hair streaked silver and tied back, wellies crusted with mud, a thick hand-knit jumper. "Is that what we're calling it now? Folklore?" She passed her glass to the publican. "Elara," he said, with a nod that read respect. "I'm Aris Thorne," he offered, hand out. She looked at it a beat, then shook, grip firm, palm calloused. "Elara Vane. I run the bookshop and the local history society for what it's worth." Her gaze weighed him. "You're the one emailing the parish about access to Mr. Haller, Hemlock's Field." "That's me. It's a fascinating monument. The runic patterns are unique. It could be pre-Celtic, maybe Neolithic. It could rewrite the early history of this region." Elara's expression did not move. "It's a door, Dr. Thorne, not a monument. And some doors are better left shut." Irritation pricked. A door to what? To what was here before us, to what's still here in the cracks and the quiet places. She leaned in, voice lowered. "We're 3 days from Samhain. The veil is thinning. Can you not feel it? The air is watchful." He glanced through the glass at the misted green. He felt cold. "I feel the damp," he said, keeping it light. She sighed, resignation heavy. "Of course, you're a man of science. You see a stone and want to measure it, scan it, chip a bit for a slide. You don't ask what it's listening for." "I'm here to learn," he said, patience fraying. "That's all. I want to understand it." "Understanding isn't knowing," Elara said. "The old ones knew. They didn't worship it or build altars to it. They acknowledged it. They gave it a wide berth, especially when the year turns and the world goes thin. They knew it was a place of passage." "Passage for whom?" "For things that are hungry," an old man muttered into his whiskey, not looking up. "Things that remember the taste of the world before iron, before fire." A small ripple of agreement moved the room. The prickle on Aris's neck wasn't the weather. This wasn't garden-variety rural suspicion. This was fear with roots. "Look," he said to Alara, "I have Mr. Hemlock's permission for a non-invasive survey. Sonic tomography. Just sound waves, it can't hurt anything." Ilara's final look was clean and cutting. "You assume the stone is a thing, inert. That's your first mistake. Your last will be making it on Halloween. Stay away from the stone on Samhain, Dr. Thorne. That is not superstition. It is a warning." She turned and left, the door swinging shut on a gust of frigid air. Later, alone in his rented cottage, he spread maps and the grainy photo across the table. Their fear was to him an anthropological curiosity, fossilized belief perfectly preserved, exactly the sort of thing that made a sight compelling. Yet Ilara's words kept circling. A door, not a monument. Nonsense. Worked stone. Forgotten people. Its secrets, geological and historical, never supernatural. Driven by the need to prove it, mostly to himself, he decided to visit before the scheduled survey. He took the hedge-lined lane in a rental, branches rasping the windows like bony fingers, parked where tarmac gave up to mud, then went on foot, the ground sucking at his boots. The field rose to a low wall. And there it was, smaller than he'd pictured, no taller than a man. But its presence filled the slope, a shard of rough dark granite, thrusting up at a slight angle, as if caught mid-emergence, or mid-withdrawal. The carvings ran deep and too precise. The spirals seemed to creep when the late light shifted. The air around it had fallen utterly still, no birdsong, no rustle in the grass. He reached out, not to touch, but to feel the space, and dread coiled, sudden and irrational. The hair on his arms rose. For one tight, braced heartbeat, he felt an ancient loneliness flood him, a cold with nothing to do with weather, the cold of deep time, of empty chambers under earth. He snatched his hand back and watched his breath smoke. He shook himself and laughed, short, sharp, and the quiet swallowed it. Suggestion. Nothing more. Local legend nipping at a jet-lagged mind. He took photographs, noted orientation, and picked his way back down, the sense of being watched staying with him until the road widened and the hedges fell away. He had data. He had permission. The survey would go ahead. He would prove the Samhain Stone was just a stone, even if, somewhere small and quiet inside, the part that had felt that primordial cold no longer agreed. Chapter 2. A Crack in the World. By morning, Hazelgrove had drawn itself tight. The mist thickened into a spectral blanket that swallowed sound and shrank the village to a pale circle a few dozen yards across. People on the green averted their eyes. Greetings, when they came at all, were brief and hushed. Ilara's bookshop was dark, a hand-written note on the door. Until after. The message was plain. He was the outsider, and he had arrived on the eve of something they held close, or feared. It only hardened his resolve. He would run the survey tonight on Halloween, not out of spite, he told himself, but for clean method. If there was anything to this talk of a thinning veil, any shift in the electromagnetic field, any strange subsonic bloom, he would be there to measure it, to turn story into data. The gear looked alien in the boot of his car against the old hedgerows and sodden fields. A terrestrial laser scanner, a ground-penetrating radar sled, and his pride, a portable sonic tomographer. The tomographer used tuned emitters and receivers to map the hidden by listening to how sound moved through it. As he'd told Ilara, it was non-invasive. It listened to the stone, nothing more. By the time he reached the field, the sun was only a rumour behind slate clouds. Dusk slid in early and leached colour from the world. Wind found its voice and moaned through the bare hawthorns that ringed the mound. Yesterday the place had felt still and watchful. Tonight it felt expectant, as if something stood just out of sight, waiting for a cue. He worked quickly. The laser scanner went up first, whirring softly as it laced unseen light across the stone and its crown of grass, building a perfect digital shell. The radar sled came next, its grid laid like a chessboard over the slope. The screen gave him little comfort. The stone's base plunged far deeper than he'd guessed, locked into the bedrock in a way that felt intentional rather than natural. Full dark arrived with the first needles of cold rain. He set the tomographer last. 6 coin-thin receivers placed in a wide ring around the stone, a web of slender cables running back to the central unit. The small black emitter he seated at the base, exactly where the deepest lightning fork carving bit into the earth. The storm that had grumbled all afternoon chose its moment. Not a sky splitter, but a deep gut-low rumble that seemed to rise from the ground itself. Wind tore at his coat and drove the rain sideways. The hawthorns rattled their thorns like bones. Conditions were far from ideal, yet a feverish drive held him. It had to be now. He triggered the sequence. A low hum, barely at the edge of hearing, slipped from the emitter, a fundamental meant to coax the stone to answer. The receivers blinked, each catching the reply. His tablet glowed in his hands like a talisman, waveforms jittering as the storm's noise scrambled the first returns. Then the pattern changed. He didn't see the stone shake. He felt it, an inland resonance that set his teeth singing and his bones aching. The hum he'd sent in came back altered, amplified, looped on itself by the monolith. Rain streaking down the spirals began to travel in odd paths, as though the grooves were tugging the water against gravity. A high whine climbed into the air, thin as a razor, and drove itself behind his eyes. On the tablet, the tidy lines blew out into a screaming spike. The tone had become a voice, a crowd of ancient, discordant whispers pressing at him from every direction at once. Impossible, he breathed, mind scrambling for a cause, harmonic feedback, piezoelectric effect, something. He reached for the central unit to kill the run. As his fingers found the switch, the emitter at the base of the stone flared with a sickly green light. The ground gave a sound like a mountain turning in its sleep, a deep, old strain. Crack, not lightning, a drier, older noise. A hairline fissure opened on the face of the Samhain Stone, glowing faintly green as it ran from the top, slicing through the largest spiral, down to the base where the emitter sagged into a melted black knot of plastic and metal. The world paused. Wind dropped. For one held heartbeat, the rain seemed to hang in the air before it remembered to fall. Through the crack he did not see the field. He saw a feverland, a bruised purple sky over a plain of black, twisted trees and jagged, colourless rock. The breath that spilled from the opening was knife-cold and smelled of ozone, damp rot, and a weight of age measured in stone rather than years. Shapes moved there, lanky, shadow-dark things that turned with slow, sure grace toward the light spilling from his world. A wave of malice pushed through him, hunger vast and old enough to feel like vacuum. The chill he had felt yesterday surged back 1,000-fold. This was no ghost. This was something that remembered when the world was new and hot and bloody. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the vision snapped shut. The light guttered, the fissure remained, a dark scar down the face, but the glow was gone. The foreign cold retreated, leaving only English rain to sting his cheeks. He stumbled back and went down in the mud. The gear lay dead around him, screens black, cables cut clean as if by giant shears. Silence folded over the field until the only sound was the hard rush of his own breath. He had done it. He grabbed what he could and ran, slipping and sliding to the car. He did not look back. The lane to Hazelgrove blurred, branches clawing at glass, thoughts slamming into each other. A door, not a monument. Alara's words beat against his skull. He skidded onto the green. The village lay dark, no lamp in any window, power gone. The hush was absolute, a thick, wool-heavy quiet that pressed the ears. The cold had teeth, his breath plumed in dense white ropes. It was not the weather's cold. It was the stone's cold, the other place's cold, spread over Hazelgrove like a shroud. He had called their warnings folklore. He had called their fear superstition. Standing in that consuming dark, Aris Thorne, man of measures and scans, finally grasped the split between knowing and believing. He knew how to run a tomogram and lay a radar grid. And now he believed, with the certainty that settles in the gut, that he had made a catastrophic mistake. Chapter 3. What the Earth Remembers. The Samhain Stone stood waiting, its dark scar gleaming like a wound that refused to heal. The villagers gathered in silence, their faces pale, clutching horseshoes, hammers, and rusted lengths of chain. Clay pots of peat embers glowed weakly in the damp air, their light fragile against the creeping dark. At Alara's command, they formed a ring around the stone, iron raised, a ragged constellation of trembling hands. She stepped into the centre, shawl clinging to her in the wind, and set the embers at the 4 points of the compass. Her voice rose, half chant, half storm, from the pages of her ancient book. The words were thick and primal, older than breath, the very tongue of soil and stone. The ground seemed to lean in to listen. Nothing stirred at first, but the cold deepened until it felt like they stood at the bottom of the sea. Then the shadows began to move. Long, thin figures crawling from the tree line, jagged silhouettes that absorbed the light. The earth itself growled beneath their feet. "They're coming," a woman gasped, gripping her scythe. "Hold the circle," Elara shouted, her voice trembling with effort. "Hold!" Aris stood at the edge, useless among those wielding old faith and older fear, but this wasn't their burden, it was his. He stepped into the circle. "What are you doing?" Elara hissed without pausing her chant. "Finishing what I started." He approached the stone, the cold clawing through his bones. "I see you," he said to the shifting dark. "I see your age, your hunger, but this world isn't yours anymore." He pointed to the ring of trembling villagers. "This world remembers fire, it remembers the sun." Alara's voice rose to a scream of syllables that made the air shimmer. The iron in their hands began to hum, a low, defiant tone that pushed against the growing roar from the shadows. The peat fires flared gold, the earth shuddering beneath their feet. And then the fissure split wide. A pulse of green light poured from the stone, a wound torn back open. Through it came the cold, the emptiness, the whispering shapes from the other side, reaching for the heat of living things. Elara faltered. The chant broke. Aris knew in that instant the door would never close from this side. He turned to her, the decision already made. "Tell them to hold," he said. "Tell them not to stop." Her eyes widened. "Aris, no." But he was already moving. He crossed the circle and pressed his hand to the stone. The frost bit instantly into his flesh, fusing skin to granite. The light flared brighter, the wind screaming in reverse as if the world itself was inhaling. The villagers staggered back, shielding their faces from the brilliance. Alara's voice returned, not a chant now, but a wail, as she spoke the final words. "By stone and soil, by iron and ember, the door is shut. By the memory of the first fire, take him, not us." The fissure flared once more, a column of white-green light roaring up through the mist. Aris's body dissolved into it, first his hand, then his arm, his voice breaking into a raw cry that was half agony, half release. The cold collapsed inward, drawing the shadows with it. The light folded, swallowed itself, and was gone. When the wind settled, the stone stood whole once more, unscarred, silent, and faintly warm. The villagers lowered their iron, tears freezing on their cheeks. The night was just a night again. The rain returned, soft and human. Elara fell to her knees before the Samhain Stone, her voice barely a breath. "You didn't listen," she whispered, touching the damp earth where he had stood. "But you learned to hear." The clouds broke above, letting through a shard of moonlight. On the smooth face of the stone, the villagers swore they could see two faint impressions, one of an outstretched hand, one of a woman's shadow reaching toward it. They would fade by morning. Hazelgrove breathed again. But the wind that night carried a sound like a heartbeat deep beneath the earth, a slow, patient echo of something that still remembered being hungry. Epilogue. The long winter. Winter came early to Hazelgrove that year. The first frost arrived before the bonfire smoke had cleared from the fields, painting the hedgerows white and still. The villagers said little of that night, what they saw, what they lost, but they kept their fires burning longer, and none walked the fields after dusk. Elara stayed. The bookshop reopened, though the shelves held more empty spaces than before. Sometimes, when the mist was low, she would find the courage to walk to the field. The Samhain Stone stood unchanged, whole, impassive, its surface darkened by rain. But in certain light she swore she could see the faint impression of a hand pressed into the granite, as though the stone itself still remembered the man who had silenced it. She would stand there in the half-light, shawl drawn tight, and whisper a single name into the wind. Aris. No answer ever came. Only the rustle of dead leaves and the distant creak of the old hawthorns. In February, when the ground finally thawed, the villagers returned to the rhythm of their lives. But the land felt different, too quiet, too alert. The birds returned late. The soil, when turned, smelled faintly of iron and wet stone. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the moors, Elara lingered by her shop door, the key cold in her hand. Across the green the lamps flickered on, one by one. All but one. The cottage nearest the lane, the one Aris had rented, remained dark. She told herself she would have it cleared come spring. And yet, sometimes, just at the edge of dusk, she saw a light within. Not the yellow of a candle or the orange pulse of a hearth, but a faint, steady glow, greenish-white, like the sheen of old lightning trapped in glass. It lasted only moments, but when it came, the wind would shift, carrying with it a whisper from the fields, low and rhythmic, like something vast and buried turning in its sleep. She no longer prayed, it was only the wind. The Samhain Stone stood silent through it all, rain washing its face clean. But on nights when the moon hung thin and sharp, a faint hum could still be heard beneath the earth, a deep, patient sound, the memory of a voice still learning how to listen.
This was The Samhain Stone, written by Coops.
Thank you for listening to The Samhain Stone, part of the Halloween short story series. If you felt the chill of Hazelgrove tonight, don't forget to subscribe, like, and join us for the next tale. Until then, keep the fire lit, keep your iron close, and if you ever hear the earth whisper back, walk the other way.